Ladies and gentlemen, there are times in human history when the invisible forces that guide the mind, the soul, and civilization itself take on new forms. We don't always see these changes with the eye, but we feel them, in our confusion, our longings, our awakenings. The age of Pisces began roughly around the birth of Christ, and for over 2,000 years it has been shaping how mankind perceives truth, divinity, and purpose. This was not an accident. It was a cosmic season, a long chapter in the human spiritual journey. Pisces, the fish, represents duality, sacrifice, belief, and transcendence. And in those symbols lies the essence of what this age gave humanity. We saw the rise of religions that taught compassion, redemption, and surrender to a higher power. Billions bowed before the idea that salvation comes through suffering, that paradise is promised if we deny ourselves here and now. These beliefs built empires. They built cathedrals, holy books, and moral laws. But there is another side to Pisces' illusion, confusion, deception. And so, hand in hand with divine truth, came false prophets. With faith came manipulation. With spirituality came institutions that grew too large, too rigid, and too interested in control. The mind of man was taught to seek truth outwardly, in priests, in temples, in scriptures, rather than inwardly, in the soul, in thought, in experience. This is the story no one tells you. This is why spiritual people today feel torn between ancient traditions and modern truths. Torn between wanting to believe and needing to question. But here's the powerful truth. Everything you've endured spiritually in this age has prepared you for a great transition, one that's happening right now. As this age fades and the Age of Aquarius rises, the rules of the inner world are changing. But to walk forward with strength, you must understand what you are leaving behind. The Age of Pisces taught us how to feel, how to suffer, how to seek. It gave us mystics, martyrs, and miracles, but it also gave us guilt, fear, and shame disguised as faith. We must honor what we've learned, but we must not be bound by it. A spiritual person in the new age must be more than a follower. You must be a seeker, a thinker, a creator. Not one who is told what to believe, but one who discovers what is true through disciplined thought, moral vision, and intuitive wisdom. The Age of Pisces taught blind faith. The next age demands enlightened action. You are not a victim of time. You are a master of it. You were born in this era for a reason. You have inherited the fruits and the failures of the Pisces age. Use them. Do not throw away the past. Study it. Learn its patterns. Question its authorities. Then rise above them. Turn spiritual confusion into clarity. Turn outdated beliefs into personal power. Every age is a school, and every soul is a student. Those who wake up graduate. The world is waking up. The Age of Pisces, like every great chapter of cosmic evolution, arrived with its own blueprint for humanity's growth. It wasn't a random alignment in the sky. It was a shift in psychological atmosphere, a deep transformation in how the collective mind of humanity interprets reality. The archetype of Pisces brought with it deep waters, emotion, empathy, belief, sacrifice. And with those waters came both opportunity and danger. The Piscean age was ruled by the idea of belief over knowledge. People did not need evidence. They needed conviction. They did not search for truth. They clung to it. In that climate, spiritual leaders emerged not because they had answers, but because they had the ability to inspire faith. And this, in both its brilliance and blindness, defined 2,000 years of spiritual growth and spiritual error. Faith is a tool of enormous power. It can move mountains, as the old texts say, but when faith is placed in the wrong hands, or when it becomes disconnected from personal understanding, it becomes a tool of control. The Age of Pisces taught billions to place faith in something outside themselves, in institutions, in religious systems, in spiritual authorities, in icons and messiahs. This was not entirely wrong. It was necessary. Humanity at that stage was not yet prepared to take full responsibility for its inner world. Pisces, being the sign of duality, was always two fish swimming in opposite directions. One fish represented true spiritual awakening, in compassion, transcendence, service, intuition. The other fish symbolized illusion, addiction, self, sacrifice to the point of personal erosion. That tension between awakening and illusion is what makes this age so complicated and so essential to understand. Religions were born not merely as belief systems, but as structures to contain and direct human yearning. They offered hope. They gave meaning to suffering. They framed mortality as a test and life as a pilgrimage toward the divine. They produced saints, sages, mystics, and martyrs. But side by side, they also produced guilt, hierarchy, fear of sin, and the suppression of questioning minds. One cannot talk about Pisces without acknowledging the element of sacrifice. This age glorified suffering as a spiritual path. The savior figure who dies for the sins of others became the highest image of love. While this motif inspired deep devotion, it also taught generations to equate pain with virtue, to see denial as the doorway to grace. In moderation, sacrifice can be noble, but in excess, it becomes self, destruction masquerading as faith. This is the emotional inheritance we carry. Even those who no longer identify with traditional religion still feel its psychological weight. The collective unconscious still holds the echoes of "I must earn worth through pain," or "to be spiritual, I must abandon the material." These patterns are Piscean in nature, noble in intent, limiting in execution. Yet, amid this, something extraordinary happened. Humanity learned to feel. It learned to empathize. It began to understand that there is more to life than logic and survival. The Piscean age taught the masses to yearn for something higher, something eternal. That yearning itself was revolutionary. Before this age, survival was the primary concern. After it, salvation became the focus, not just in the religious sense, but in the emotional and philosophical sense. Pisces also governs dreams, imagination, poetry, and music. And so during this era, the arts flourished as spiritual expression. Sacred music, inspired literature, visionary art, all became vessels for divine truth. Through suffering came beauty, through longing came creation, through faith came expression, but always this came with the shadow, escapism, fantasy, delusion. Many pursued heaven and abandoned earth. Many chased light and ignored reality. It's important to recognize that this age also created dependency. People were trained to wait for divine intervention rather than create change themselves. The concept of karma, destiny, original sin, salvation, all contributed to a world in which humans were spectators in their own lives. This was the paradox of Pisces, surrender versus sovereignty. Trusting in divine timing, yet often failing to act. This psychological landscape didn't vanish overnight. It shaped entire civilizations. It became the emotional DNA of billions. Even in today's modern world of science and rationality, the Piscean echoes remain. Many still seek gurus, many still feel guilt for choosing themselves, many still believe suffering is a sign of righteousness, but the purpose of an age is not to remain in it forever. Its purpose is to teach, then release. The Age of Pisces was a spiritual classroom built on feeling, belief, and surrender. Those who mastered it did not escape reality. They transformed it. They learned to feel deeply without drowning, to believe without blindly following, to surrender without giving up their power. And that is the lesson we must now carry forward. As humanity floated through the spiritual waters of Pisces, it began to encounter not just divine inspiration, but manipulation. The age was not only about teaching us to feel, to believe, to surrender. It was also about seeing what happens when those impulses are hijacked. The very institutions that were supposed to uplift the soul often used spiritual symbols as shackles. A subtle system emerged, one that taught people to look outward for every answer and upward for every solution, except inward. This was not entirely a conspiracy, it was a phase of growth. When a child is young, it depends on its parents. When humanity was spiritually young, it depended on external authorities, and those authorities, whether they wore crowns or robes, discovered that belief is the most powerful currency of all. If you can guide a man's belief, you can steer his actions. If you can shape a woman's faith, you can shape her destiny. Pisces is a water sign. Water doesn't resist. It adapts. It flows around obstacles. It takes the shape of its container. The Piscean mind was shaped similarly. It absorbed ideas like water absorbs dye, fully and without resistance. The beliefs of family, church, state, culture. These soaked the mind of the average person before they even had the chance to question them. The idea of questioning, in fact, was discouraged. Obedience was called virtue. Submission was called faith. Doubt was treated as danger. The institutions of the Piscean era, religions, empires, ideologies, relied on this psychological structure. They built systems that demanded loyalty and called it love. They painted fear as humility. They turned guilt into a spiritual language. Millions were taught that they were born broken, sinful, unworthy, and that only through an external authority could they be made whole. The human spirit began to shrink under these ideas. When people forget that divinity lives within, they become dependent on someone else to tell them who they are. They hand over their power. They trade spiritual responsibility for spiritual dependency. This is not empowerment. It is enslavement wrapped in sacred cloth. But something deeper was happening beneath the surface. Every time a soul obeyed out of fear, a question stirred inside. Every time someone felt ashamed instead of awakened, an inner tension grew. That tension built silently across centuries. Eventually, it reached a boiling point. Mystics, philosophers, revolutionaries, free thinkers began to emerge, not in opposition to truth, but in opposition to control. They were products of the Pisces age, but they refused to be prisoners of it. They sought God not in churches, but in nature, in silence, in direct experience. They challenged the idea that truth belonged to one book, one priest, one ritual. They whispered the dangerous idea that the divine could be discovered within the self, and slowly, cracks formed in the great walls of spiritual hierarchy. But those cracks were not yet enough. The age of Pisces still held tightly to its illusion of separation. People still saw heaven as somewhere else, enlightenment as something to be earned, and spiritual authority as something that must be granted by others. They didn't yet know they could author their own connection to truth. This is where the real conflict of the age took place, not in cathedrals or courts, but in the soul of every person. A war between submission and sovereignty, between trusting the divine within versus fearing the divine outside, between living by inner vision or outer rule. This conflict did not destroy spirituality, it matured it, because after being told what to think for so long, people finally hungered to think for themselves. And this hunger, this drive to know and not just believe, is what marks the turning of the age. The illusions of Pisces still linger, yes, but they are dissolving. People are asking dangerous questions again. They are looking inward again, and they are realizing that their minds are not temples to be governed by others, but instruments to be tuned by themselves. But with that realization comes responsibility. Freedom without wisdom leads to chaos, and that is why understanding this age matters. You are not just inheriting its beauty, you are inheriting its burden. You are carrying the echoes of every false belief ever planted in the name of God. You are also carrying the seeds of awakening planted by every mystic who dared to say, "There is more, and I will find it." If you do not understand how your soul was trained to obey before it was trained to think, then you will keep falling into new versions of the same trap. Not every guru who smiles is enlightened. Not every movement that preaches love is rooted in truth. The age of Pisces taught us how to feel, but it also taught us how easily feelings can be misled when thought is absent. The age of Pisces trained the collective soul to surrender. It taught billions how to believe, how to hope, how to follow. But what it did not teach, at least not directly, was how to evolve out of that dependence. That responsibility now falls on this generation, and that responsibility begins with awareness. You cannot walk into a new age wearing the mindset of the old one. The subconscious habits of blind obedience, self-sacrifice, guilt-driven spirituality, and emotional confusion must now be confronted. They cannot be transcended by rejection alone. They must be understood, observed, and consciously replaced. The Age of Aquarius will not tolerate unconscious spiritual behavior. This new age demands clarity, reason, sovereignty, and alignment between inner truth and outer action. But none of that can be achieved unless one first recognizes the hidden programming inherited from Pisces. And make no mistake, it is hidden. It exists not only in religious doctrines or institutions, but in emotional reactions, language, moral assumptions, and inherited belief systems that were never consciously chosen. Aquarius is an air sign. It deals with thought, electricity, innovation, networks, freedom, and the future. Unlike Pisces, which asked humanity to feel its way to God, Aquarius demands that we understand our place in the divine system. That understanding requires more than mysticism. It requires discipline. It requires intellectual courage. It requires spiritual maturity. This is where many spiritual seekers falter. They want the light, but they do not want the responsibility of being the source of it. They want the universe to guide them, but they resist becoming the navigator. They ask for signs, but ignore the mind that could interpret them. This Piscean dependency must be dismantled brick by brick, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You are not here merely to believe in the divine. You are here to express it, and that expression begins with the courage to examine everything you were taught about God, truth, destiny, and identity. Aquarius demands that you use your mind, not as a critic of spirituality, but as its architect. The sacred is no longer something distant and mysterious. It is becoming measurable, knowable, applicable. This is not the death of mystery. It is its refinement. To transition from Pisces to Aquarius is to transition from devotion to creation, from being a follower of truth to a co-creator of it, from depending on spiritual intermediaries to becoming your own. This does not mean abandoning feeling, but it does mean balancing it with thought. It means taking the emotional depth gained in Pisces and pairing it with the intellectual strength required by Aquarius. And this shift is already happening. You can see it in the rise of people questioning old dogmas. You can see it in the merging of science and spirituality. You can see it in the way communities are forming, no longer around institutions, but around shared values and ideas. Aquarius is a network builder. It is not ruled by hierarchy. It is ruled by connection. The power is decentralized. The teacher is no longer on a pedestal. They are in the mirror, but this decentralization brings its own dangers. In the absence of traditional authority, there is chaos. Everyone becomes their own guru, and without inner clarity, confusion can spread faster than truth. That is why the knowledge of Pisces is still relevant. It taught humility. It taught the cost of ego. It taught compassion. These values must not be discarded. They must be translated into Aquarian language: service without submission, love without naivety, wisdom without dogma. Those who are spiritually awake today are standing at a crossroads between two ages. One foot is still tied to the emotional habits of Pisces. The other is reaching toward the intellectual future of Aquarius. And this creates tension, an inner war between the comfort of what was and the uncertainty of what could be. But in that tension lies transformation. The ones who will lead in this new age are not those who preach louder. They are those who integrate deeper. Those who can look back at Pisces and say, "I honor what you taught me," and then look forward and say, "Now I will think for myself." Every illusion you unlearn makes you more useful to the collective. Every fear you dissolve creates more mental space for truth. Every time you question an old belief, you are clearing the debris of a dying age. The age of Pisces was emotional, mystical, and hierarchical. The age of Aquarius is mental, integrative, and individual. But it will only serve you if you are prepared. And preparation begins by realizing this. You are no longer a seeker who follows. You are a soul who understands.